Bram Stoker noted that the local word for devil was bad lad, and that bar guests are terrifying apparitions taking shape, human or animal. But this book was to prove much, much more significant. An account of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia by William Wilkinson, Esquire, late British consul resident at Bucharest. On page 19, Bram Stoker jotted down a little piece of information, just for reference. He wasn't certain of its significance. Dracula, wrote Wilkinson, in the Wallachian language, means devil. The Wallachians were at that time, as they are at present, used to give this as a surname to any person who rendered himself conspicuous either by courage, cruel actions, or cunning. Now, Bram Stoker evidently hadn't got a clue what all this was about, but in the fullness of time, this book, with its unprepossessing title, An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia, proved to be Count Dracula's birth certificate. Bram Stoker spent many hours walking through St. Mary's churchyard on the cliffs above the town. Like a civil service clerk with a morbid turn of mind, he carefully noted down 87 names and inscriptions from these graves, complete with footnotes. Thomas Davidson, drowned off the coast of Holland. Cornelius Usherwood, lost at sea. Anne Swales, died 6th February 1795. We hope our souls in heaven will dwell at last. It was at Whitby that Stoker first began to plot what was to become the central section of his story, of a vampire from the east who arrives in a deserted schooner, the Demeter rather than the Dimitri, to colonize the west. Here in St. Mary's, the vampire attacks his first victim on English soil, Lucy Westenra, who will, as a result, become one of the undead.
I could see the seat and the white figure, for I was now close enough to distinguish it even through the spells of shadow. There was undoubtedly something long and black bending over the half-reclining white figure. I called in fright, "Lucy!"
For the character of his villain, Stoker needed to look no further than the Lyceum Theatre off the Strand in London. The actor-manager, Henry Irving, was a man he both worshipped and feared. Stoker had been working for him at the Lyceum as business manager, public relations officer, and, as he put it, loyal and devoted servitor for 10 long and grueling years. It was a job which began at breakfast time and ended late in the evening, much of the time in between being spent looking after and flattering Henry Irving's gigantic ego.
Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this national dawn. Down the tower of honor.
Sometimes, after the show, Stoker and Irving would have a midnight supper in the beefsteak room behind the stage here in the Lyceum Theatre about a century ago. And they'd be joined by artists and public figures of the day, people like Oscar Wilde or the painter James McNeill Whistler. And on one such occasion, they had supper with Hall Caine, a novelist from the Isle of Man, and various other people, to talk about suitable parts for their star performer. And the subject turned to the supernatural. Trouble was that Irving had tried most of the juiciest roles in this area already. The Flying Dutchman, the Wandering Jew, Mephistopheles the Devil. And as Hall Caine recalled, the dominating element in his personality was proving something of a problem where casting was concerned. The parts had to be big with a large slice of ham. Now, it may be that Stoker's relationship with this dominating man, on the one hand hero worship and on the other exploitation, provided him with the central idea for the novel he was working on. Dracula would certainly have been a part which Henry Irving could have got his teeth into. Bram Stoker had to do much of his writing in hotel bedrooms while on tour with the Lyceum Company, or on his annual summer break. Even then, it wasn't uncommon for Henry Irving to summon him back to the Strand at short notice. Every year from 1893 onwards, he chose to take a holiday here on the bleak coastline of northeast Scotland at the little-known fishing village of Port Errol, now Cruden Bay. The locals remembered him as a humourless, preoccupied sort of figure who would shout at the sea when he went for his solitary walks. On his first visit, he fell in love with the place and stayed at the local hotel, the Kilmarnock Arms. Sitting alone in his room and trying to concentrate on a new Lyceum production of Macbeth, Bram Stoker had trouble getting that nightmare of the strong man and his sexy predatory disciples out of his system. In this state of mind, he started the hard slog of drafting Dracula. But Stoker was looking for a big opening for his story. He wandered further north along the Buchan coast and came across Slains Castle, built in the early 17th century, the residence of the Earls of Errol, which seemed to grow out of the sheer granite rocks. He'd already written of the vampire's dramatic arrival in England. Now he wanted to construct the events which came before the Whitby shipwreck, today the best-known section of the novel. His young hero, the solicitor's clerk, Jonathan Harker, arrives at the home of the vampire count, a vast ruined castle perched on a rock.
Welcome to my house, Mr. Harker. Come freely, go safely.
Count Dracula?
I am Count Dracula. Will you come in? And please, leave here some of the happiness you bring.
Suddenly I became conscious of the fact that I was in the courtyard of a vast ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the moonlit sky. I could see even in the dim light that the stone was massively carved, but that the carving had been much worn away by time and weather. I began to rub my eyes and pinch myself to see if I were awake. It all seemed like a horrible nightmare to me. What sort of a place had I come to? What sort of grim adventure was it on which I had embarked?
But it was here, in the circular reading room of the British Museum, that Bram Stoker made most of the detailed discoveries which fleshed out his holiday researches. On the very first page of Dracula, he wrote, "Having some time at my disposal in London, I visited the British Museum and made search among the books and maps in the library regarding Transylvania." Exactly what he did. Now, originally, he'd intended to set the book in Styria, part of Austria, but it was reading then fashionable books such as these which made him change his mind. The Land Beyond the Forest by Emily Gerard, who was the wife of a serving officer in the Austro-Hungarian cavalry, a book which argued that Transylvania might be termed the very land of superstition. 2 volumes. And then The Book of Werewolves by the Reverend Sabine Baring-Gould, the man who wrote the hymn Onward Christian Soldiers, as well as about 100 books, which had lots of facts and figures about the behavior of wolves and of people who turned into wolves. Listen to them, the children of the night, says the Count in the novel. What music they make. Well, the music came from this book. But the most important discovery that Bram Stoker made in the British Museum was this. A pamphlet published in Bamberg, Germany in 1491, chronicling the campaigns of Vlad Dracula, Vlad IV, with a woodcut portrait on the cover. It told of Dracula's campaigns against the Turks, roughly the same time as Richard III was ruling England. It had nothing to do with vampirism at all. Vlad seems to have preferred impaling or roasting his victims. But this book certainly provided Stoker with the physical description of Count Dracula. It's the face of a military commander rather than a lounge lizard. So it was all these books which persuaded Bram Stoker to set his novel in the Carpathian Mountains in modern-day Romania, even though, while he was preparing Dracula, he personally never went further east than Whitby.
Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on the 1st of May, arriving at Vienna early the next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but the train was an hour late. It seems to me that the further east you go, the more unpunctual are the trains. What ought they to be in China? Beyond the green swelling hills of the Mittelland rose mighty slopes of forest, up to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves.
Jonathan Harker's journey was a case of tourism of the mind, based on reading and fantasizing in London, rather than first-hand experience in the wilds of Eastern Europe. The details of the journey, from timetables, hotels, even the recipe for chicken paprika, were transposed, sometimes word for word, from printed sources such as Baedeker's Tourist Guide to Hungary and Transylvania, and turned into the Journal of Jonathan Harker.
It was on the dark side of twilight when I finally got to Bistritz, which is a very interesting old place. I felt a strange chill, and a lonely feeling came over me. I waited with a sick feeling of suspense.
Stoker wasn't writing about the real landscape